Hello everyone. Hope everyone enjoyed our story of Gulliver in the Giant's Land. And I know everyone waiting for it. So let me start. Oh, not only you are waiting for it, but here is our cat, giant cat, also waiting for our story. So here is we start our story. That at first, oh, it's our giant cat. So let me start with introduction. In this session, we will start. Before start our session, we discuss about previous knowledge. In this chapter, Gulliver himself is the narrator, means the one who tells the story. He is sharing the story as his real life experience, which actually is fictional. So, he began the story with a little introduction of himself. Gulliver was a sailor. He often sailed along the world and visited strange villages. Once he visited a village of dwarfs. So, in this session, we also discuss about the life of dwarf and our India in Assam, Amargaon. Dwarf are living here and they enjoyed their life by playing the drama. And then we all seen the proud of our nation. We saw that here is dwarf also got a trophy and gold medals. So Gulliver, he often sailed along the world and visited strange village. Once he visited a village of dwarfs where the villager's name was Lilliput and the people living in this village were called Lilliputians, who were dwarfs, and to the Gulliver was a giant man. Another time he visited a land of giants. In this village, he was a dwarf and the villagers were very giant. Gulliver is sharing his experience when he visited this village. He was once trying to find a gap in the hedge. As he know that here is huge giant man walking towards him. He was shaken by fear and was trying to hide himself. The giant man spoke and his voice was very loud. His voice sounded like a voice louder than a trumpet. At the same moment, he saw other 7 giants men who looked like monster to Gulliver, who was very little compared to the giant man here. These giant men were coming to rip the corn. Rip means to cut or gather the part of the plant which is ready to be eaten. They carried a ripping hook which was very large. Maybe it was normal size for the giant man, but to Gulliver it was a very huge hook which they used to rip. So, rest of story we will start from the textbook, page number 109. He called his friends and gently placed me on the ground. They all sat on the ground to take a good look at me. I walked slowly backward and forward, pulled off my hat, and made a slow bow towards the farmers. I tried to speak to them loudly in several languages. Each time I did so, the farmer who picked me up held his ear very close to me, but in vain. The farmer took me to his house and placed me at some distance on the dining table, which was 30 feet high from the floor. Dinner was brought for the farmer in a dish which was 10 feet in a diameter. The farmer's wife crumbled some bread and placed it before me. In the middle of dinner, I heard a noise behind me. It was the purring of a cat that was 10 times larger than an ox. The farmer's wife was stroking him. Then entered the farmer's 1 year old son in the arms of a lady. On seeing me, the child grabbed me from the table and put my head into his mouth. I shouted so loudly that the baby dropped me. I would have broken my neck if the mother had not held her apron under me. Later, she put me on her own bed and covered me with a clean white handkerchief. I slept dreaming of my home, my wife, and my children. Now, children, let we know more about this rest of story from this paragraph. Gulliver was surprised when he comes across a high field. He realized that the grass is more than 20 feet tall. Similarly, corn is at least 40 feet high. Gulliver saw another giant walking along the path he's on. He notes that each of the giants stretches each about 10 yards long. The well-dressed giant is joined by 7 workers whom he struck to begin reaping the corn. And filled with despair, Gulliver lied down and hoped that he will die. But they thought that he was such a powerful and strong creature. When he is to be stopped only by one of farmers, Gulliver cries out as loudly as he can. The giant stops short and picks up Gulliver to get a better look. Gulliver resists too, struggling in order to avoid being dropped 60 feet to the ground, and instead brings his hands to a prayer position and paints his eyes skyward. The giant seems pleased with Gulliver and putting him in his pocket, heads over to show his master. Master means hire a farmer. The farmer takes Gulliver home to show his wife, who screams at first, but when she saw how polite Gulliver is, she quickly warmed up. And here is it. You can see that here is all are looking so giant, and our Gulliver is like a dwarf. Gulliver and the farmer tried to speak each other, but they were unsuccessful. At dinner time, Gulliver saw that the full family consists of the parents, three children, and elderly grandmother also here. The farmer's wife break up some bread and a small piece of meat and hand them to Gulliver, who gets out his knife and fork and proceed to eat. Here is delighting the whole family. Later, as Gulliver walked across the table, you can see that here is a small cat, but it's a look like a ox, 10 times bigger ox. Later, as Gulliver walked across the table towards the farmer, here is the farmer's son. Farmer's son pick up him by one leg and jangle means hang losing keep his leg him in the air until the farmer grabbed him back and boxed the boy's ear. Gulliver not at this point and Fent is brought into room. At the sight of the Gulliver cried to get him into its hand with which mother take her. Mother oblige means someone who take a favor quickly the baby and puts his head in its mouth, at which Gulliver cried out until the baby drops him, luckily into mother's apron. Then here is Gulliver was little bit afraid. Why? Because he saw that here is a small boy took his leg and he tried to pick him and keep him in his mouth. In between dinner, Gulliver heard a purring sound. I know you all know which animals makes purring sound. Yes, cat makes purring sound. But that cat sound is the giant land was 10 times louder than the normal cat sound. It sounded like a sound louder than that of an ox. Later, if mother had not let Gulliver fall in her apron, then his neck would have been probably broken. After that, the mother put him on her bed and covered him with a white handkerchief, which was very comforting to Gulliver, and he later dreamed of her wife, children, and went to sleep. He slept peacefully like a small baby. Hope everyone enjoyed this story. In this story, here is so many new words. So we already discussed, but here some more new words. Let we discuss. Here is thunder, loud noise, monster, a giant, to reap, to harvest, to gather crops. Then curiosity, interest, to pull off, to remove, in vain, on, of no use. Then struck, to pat, to grab, to catch. Here is we complete our this activity 3. Then it's a time for reading. In English, reading is so important. So in this session, we will also read a story. So it's a fun with reading.
Extract. Gulliver lands in Brobdingnag, where he is not the largest, but the smallest. Let's see what happens in the land of Brobdingnag. I left Bristol on June 20th, 1702. I sailed with Captain John Nicholas, whose ship was bound for Surat, India. We had clear weather until we reached the Cape of Good Hope. We docked there fresh water, but we ended up spending the winter there, for the ship needed repairs and the captain was ill. We left Africa in spring and sailed around Madagascar into the Indian Ocean. On April 19th, violent winds began to blow, and we were pushed to the east side of the Molucca Islands. On May 2nd, the waters became calm again. But the captain, who knew these waters, said that there'll be a storm again soon. And he was right. The very next day, a storm hit us. According to my calculations, during this storm, we were carried so far away that even the oldest sailor on board could not tell in what part of the world we were. Finally, after several stormy days, the weather became calm again. Luckily, the ship wasn't damaged, but we were driven nearly 2,000 kilometers east. None of us knew where we were, so the captain decided to continue sailing east. 2 weeks later, we saw an island, which I later learned was called Brobdingnag. Vasco da Gama had found a new sea route to India in 1498. Soon after that, traders and travelers started coming to India. So, it was quite fashionable to write about journeys to India. Gulliver's ship, however, lost its way in a storm and landed in Brobdingnag, a fictitious island. The captain ordered some sailors to take a boat to the island to look for fresh water. I went along because I was interested in seeing a new country. Our men wandered on the shore to look for fresh water, and I walked alone about a mile towards the other side of the island. I saw that the country was all barren and rocky. While the sailors continued their search for a stream, I decided to take a walk. When I got back, I was surprised to see that the sailors were already in the boat and were rowing as fast as they could towards the ship. I was about to call out to them when I saw a huge creature chasing after them. I knew he wouldn't be able to catch them as they had almost reached the ship. I turned and ran away from him. I entered a field with grass that was 7 meters high and with corn that was 13 meters high. It took me an hour to cross the field. The trees were much taller than usual. I tried to find a hole in the hedge so that I could get into the next field, when I saw a giant walking towards me, his footsteps thundering. I was struck with utmost fear and astonishment. I hid among the corn, hoping I wouldn't be seen. He was looking into the next field on the right. Just then, the giant shouted, and other giants appeared. They came towards him with reaping hooks in their hands, and each hook was as big as 6 scythes. They were not as well dressed as the first giant. They began to cut the corn in the field where I hid. They slashed their blades through the crop as they came nearer to me. I crept back until I reached the part of the field that had earlier been destroyed in the rain. The stalks were so interwoven that I could not creep through, and the shreds of corn pierced through my clothes and into my flesh. Sadly, I lay down between 2 ridges and wished for death. I thought of my wife and children and regretted my decision of making the second voyage against the advice of my family and friends. I could not help but think of my time in Lilliput, where I was considered the greatest prodigy in the world by the tiny inhabitants. Now, I could understand how they felt when I was there. After all the crop had been cut, I was discovered. I now felt like a Lilliputan. Suddenly, I saw a huge foot coming down on me. I screamed as loud as I could, and the foot stopped in midair. The giant lifted his foot and stared at me. He picked me up with his thumb and finger. I feared for my life and thought he would dash me to the ground almost 60 feet below, like we do to any little hateful creatures that we want to kill. In these lines, the writer points out the human habit of killing tiny insects or even bigger creatures out of fear or just to show our might.